19 game developers interview collection. This collection of interviews first appear in a Japanese book called Introduction to Game Design, published in 1994. Although featured as interviews, these are more like testimonials and are directed at aspiring young game developers in Japan. Each interviewee talks about how he got into the industry, his experience developing games, and what qualities he thinks a good developer should have. The reason why I want to talk about this is beyond the fact that it's just interesting to see how these people thought about video game development at the time. You also get a sense of how people thought about video game development at the time. In comparison to how people think about video game development today. And it has overlap with storytelling, ideology, being embedded into video games now, technical expertise, the thing I talked about earlier, friction, right? Friction creating ingenuity. Who they targeted for when they were creating games, right? So this gives you some insight that I think is still valuable today, that we have somewhere along the way, we have missed out on all of this valuable insight. So let's get into it. So we have Yuji Horii, okay? And he talks about the design of the stories, but he's also a programmer himself, right? Now so at the time, he's like, I don't do the programming myself, but when I first started out, I wouldn't program everything and bring the completed game to the software publisher. Oh, sorry, I would program everything and bring the completed game. I apologize. In this way, I made Portopia, Renzoku, Setsujin Jaiken, and Karuizawa Yukai Anai all on my own. I did all the graphics as well. Although I no longer program, even today I still use the knowledge I acquired then. This was interesting to me because this is a good example of what you guys should be doing out there if you're interested in programming. Go build something on your own, like the game I'm trying to build. You'll pick up way more than any amount of tutorials, any amount of tools and libraries and engines and things like that. You're going to learn way more, and you're going to be able to carry that with you for the rest of your life. Okay? So as he goes on to explain about his programming knowledge, he explains exactly what I'm kind of hinting at. The amount of programming that he did on his own allowed him to gain some knowledge about complex ideas, how things work under the hood, how he would approach different aspects of video games, etc., etc. Okay. Now, he talks about story and how story plays into the game. So at the time, he says you cannot just write a story and then go ahead and program. You have to consider how the story plays into the programming and how the programming plays into the story. So when you're talking about displaying characters on screen, maps, dialogue, etc., you can't just go and just do the programming and then build a story around that, and vice versa. Do a story and then build the programming around that. There's an interplay. I thought that was very interesting, which is something that a lot of people seem to forget, because now what people do is they'll pull out Unreal Engine or whatever, and they'll just build a game and then they'll smack a story on top, or the other way around. But these things have an interplay, an art there that is lost in today's day and age. He was a freelance writer who bought a PC 6001 computer, programmed using BASIC and assembly, talks about Dragon Quest and how the concept of story versus naming versus programming played out. So for example, he said, well, I have these names for Dragon Quest, these character names, and everyone was like, we don't really like the names. And he's like, okay, it's easy to change it. Like, that's an easy thing we can change from a programming perspective. So, why are you worried about it? And they're like, okay, fine. And then they ended up keeping the names. So he just continues to make that point that there's an interplay. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. Hironobu Sakaguchi, who worked at Square, did music, talks about programming in BASIC. My first adventure games were written in BASIC. We're talking like, man, these guys were legends. He was inspired by games like Tetris and SimCity, who were done by a single programmer. Making a game is a marathon, takes over a year. You got to be fired up, etc. I kind of think we're missing a lot of that in this day and age. Although games like Clair Obscura and others are proving out that there's still people who are passionate about games, so that's good. He talks about the design plans of particular games he worked on, and talks about how he encourages other people to take the passions that they have and use them to create games. Okay, now we have Shigeru Miyamoto. Does that name sound familiar? I'm pretty sure some of you will recognize this name. He made Mario, right? So that's where it comes from. And he thought of it not as a computer game. I didn't feel like I was making something called a computer game. It was more like I was creating a toy or a form of play or a product that will be popular. And my thinking was that using a computer for that purpose would be effective. That's how he viewed Mario. I thought that was very, very interesting. Instead of looking at instead of looking at video games as programs, you're looking at them as something that's equivalent to toys. And people are going to play them. And the mechanism upon which you deploy that toy, you put that toy in people's hands, is through software. He talks about F-Zero, prototyping it. They had to have a different perspective on the technical achievements of that, how they're going to do that. A story is not a game. This was probably one of the most interesting parts. At Nintendo, we get many letters with stories and designs from kids asking us to make such and such a game. However, most of them are just imitating Mario or Dragon Quest, and only the stories are different. But thinking up a story and setting is not the main part of game design. If you only change the surface appearance, you really haven't changed anything. It's often said that the heart of a game is its story, but that's not the case. The story comes only after the core of the game system is completed. Then the characters come into focus and the world starts to manifest. Two siblings separated at birth are reunited. I can't call that a game design, he laughs. There is no backstory to Mario after all. On the other hand, if someone came to me with a proposal for a new system like that of the game SimCity, that would probably catch my attention. Without that, game design is just a game of make-believe. I don't mean to speak negatively about using your imagination like that, of course, but there's no need for young aspiring designers to do that. What's important is starting from the fundamentals. So do you see kind of, the kind of point he's trying to make here? When it comes to story building, and even this actually also applies to things like websites, and also I would say it even applies to software in general, to be honest with you. When you're building any kind of software, when you're building any kind of website, the primary thing that you're going to try and do is get core fundamental aspects down. Does this thing work well? So like security is one of those things that's kind of a catch-all. It doesn't matter what you're building. You want to get your security right, no matter what it is you're building. It doesn't matter who's using it and for what purpose, whether it's a game or whatever, right? That's an example of something that is a core fundamental aspect that you need to get down. Then you talk about the story. And the story might be, I am a user who, wants to play MP3s on my machine, right? And so then you build off of that. And that's something that is missing. And one of the reasons why it's missing today is because we've leaned so far in the programming industry into just pull something off the shelf and don't worry about those core fundamentals. The core fundamentals are built for you. And as we're discovering, unfortunately, a lot of it is not. Or it's built so poorly that it betrays the entire purpose of what you're trying to build. Generally speaking, there are definitely some things that are successful because of the nature of the thing that they're doing. But I think what he's describing here is actually a very good principle that applies to more than just video games. Okay, so then he goes on to talk about like film and movies and TV shows and stuff like that, and directing stories and everything. And there's a lot more. I'm not going to read it all, but you can see there's people who talk about on here about programming and how they tackled limitations with the way that they had to get things rendered or get certain features out. And a lot of them talk about the limitations of the hardware at the time and how it encouraged them to look for alternative methods. And in primarily, if I remember correctly, yes, I can't remember where it was, but somewhere in here, oh, I can't remember where it was, but somewhere in here, one of the interviewees made the case that to solve particular problems that you were limited in solutions to because of the nature of like that hardware that was accessible to them at the time, you had to simplify or remove features or look for alternative paths to get to the same thing. And so that might mean changing the story in order to fit a technical feature into the concept of the game. It's this kind of article, like this page, I mean, on the website, and these kinds of interviews, I think still hold a lot of weight today. They hold a lot of power and weight in today's, day and age, where people have mostly forgotten a lot of the learnings that we took for granted from people who built these amazing games back in the past. And like I said, a lot of these learnings translate over from video games to the typical software and websites and stuff that you guys used to enjoy but no longer enjoy because people have forgotten all these lessons. So definitely check out that website. You can read it in whole. I don't want to go through all of it because it'll get boring, but it's called shmuplations.com, shmuplations.com.